morning. This cool, chilly morning, it's warm in here with all of you warm souls and the light of God through all of you. This is the third part of a series that we've been doing of the unfoldment of the soul. Special welcome to our online community. Thank you for being with us today. We are honored by your presence. Special thanks to Rob Rauchi for doing that every week. He's very dedicated to get that published and out on the web for us every week. So that's a great service that he does for us all here at our center. So that's very good. So again, this is the third Sunday of the Unfoldment series. And today we're talking about I am emerging. So in the first week, Rosa, this was 2 weeks ago, Palm Sunday, Rosa, our licensed Unity teacher, talked about the unfolding process. Rosa hinted upon the shift from our personal caterpillar experience into something more, something different from what we are. Rosa used the story of the caterpillar stripe, if you remember that, to relate his journey of unfolding from caterpillar to the cocoon. This also being a parallel to Palm Sunday, the story of Jesus riding into Jerusalem, going into the unknown, but crucial next step in the evolutionary process of his ministry. Metaphysically, Rosa discussed the sacred time of Holy Week, honoring the sacred journey we are taking. So that was the first week, Palm Sunday. Last week, Reverend Joe discussed key points, the inward journey of the evolutionary process, of stepping into our unknown as unlimited possibility and potential. So we all know that there's a stirring inside of us. There's something inside of us that's asking us to answer the call, if you will, to come up higher. There's something in us that we innately know. Reverend Joe was talking about that. It's interesting, she talked about the Palestinian Jesus, the story of the Palestinian Jesus movement. If you haven't heard this, I encourage you to listen to it online. Would have died without Peter and Paul carrying the message. With the crucifixion, the Jesus message, the Jesus story, would have died. You know, for years I've wondered what made this message, in my own life for years, what made this Jesus message perpetuate for 2,000 years. It's kind of what put me on this quest to search and seek to know, how did this survive? How did this message survive? Even though started to know that some of the stories were metaphors in the Gospels, there are metaphors and allegories. It's not literal. Most of it's not literal. Wasn't intended to be literal. In the West, we've taken it to be literal. But the Jewish writers, and the writers even in the Old and New Testament, never intended for it to be literal. Our Western minds made it literal. That wasn't the intent. So, as Reverend Joe says a lot, the historical story, she likes her stories, about the resurrection and other narratives in the gospel were presented based on the writers of the gospel to tell a story. That was basically what it was. But there's more to that. In New Thought, we know there is always a deeper meaning in the story. The writers knew there was more meaning. The resurrection takes place in us every day, that we rise to Jesus' realization of the indwelling divinity of man. This is Jesus' main teachings. All throughout Unity, Eric Butterworth particularly says, the divinity of man was the main teaching of Jesus that the Orthodox Church forgot. So resurrection occurs for us daily. As a side note, Reverend Joe didn't talk about this, but one of the things I love, Charles Fillmore in 12 Powers of Man, he talks about the Judgment Day bugaboo. Thank you, Bob. Yeah. He says that it was a mistranslation, that everywhere Jesus talks about Judgment Day, he's talking about a judgment day, not the judgment day. So all throughout history, we've talked about the judgment day, and it's really not that. It's, at least according to Charles Fillmore, a judgment day. It was a mistranslation. So that the repeated consumptions of causes that in our lives that we can affect that every day. Every day is a judgment day for us. Some days, for me, more than once a day. So after the caterpillar actually molts, the caterpillar actually molts 5 times, and then forms a chrysalis, and then the green goo appears, the green goo of the chrysalis. So today, I'll be exploring then I'm emerging, becoming the butterfly, becoming and living and being what we are. So on my journey, the key is remembering, staying awake, and practicing the presence. Now, remembering who we are, why is that such a struggle? Well, it's like the movie, what is the movie? Men in Black. You know, if you got that neuralyzer, when you're zapped by Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, then you forget that you just saw a bunch of aliens eating a bunch of people or tearing up a bunch of stuff. So that's what happens. So we all ought to have sunglasses or special glasses so that we don't forget who we are. So in that case, you were forgetting about all the aliens. In this case, we forget who we are. In our busy, hectic life, we forget who we are, that we are one with the divine. Staying awake, almost the same thing as remembering, but to me it's a little different. If we have moments where we fail to remember, so we awake to the presence that's always within us, and then we live our lives from that presence and that awareness. The key to unfoldment is practice, 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 like real estate. 3 important things. Live in the now, not the past or the future, and we'll talk about how we practice it in just a minute. We also forget about our old beliefs in God. This is the God I grew up with for years and years and years. Many of you have too. And so we forget that. There's old theology that's embedded theology, not just from what we were taught in the churches that we grew up in, but what we call the collective consciousness. I mean, it's pervasive everywhere in our Western society. Again, it's been around for 2,000 years, actually more. So there's embedded in us these beliefs that could keep coming back. So more than just this anthropomorphic God, I call it a God with skin on him. There's not a guy up in the sky, ready to punish or reward for, arbitrarily or capriciously, and sometimes I think. Years of teaching and training has told us that this is not true. Yet we should always evaluate our consciousness to see if there's remnants of that hanging on, that old theology. And remember, stay awake. There's nothing outside of you to reward or punish. We always think about that as being punishment, but there's nothing there to reward you either. Release any old theology of this God or any power outside of you. We'll talk some more about that in just a minute too. So while we're talking about that, I found this hand of God slide. That's not an okay sign. I was looking for a guy with a white beard and a baseball bat, because that was the other image I had of God. But this is a thumper. He's fixing to thump this guy on the head for whatever reason, and that was what I thought. And while I'll talk about this, there was a lot of healing. I had to go through a lot of healing for this. I'm sure a lot of us do. A lot of us are in unity because of that. But I came to a lot of healing because of that. I realized the the God of my youth, the people of my youth were loving and embraced me and loved me. This is what they knew. So I don't have any ill will toward any of that now. But it did it did take a lot of years to get over that. So, but there is a thumper image in my mind that I have to constantly be on guard against. So the other thing that we've learned is that the early Christian church, particularly these two that I've got up here, the council, the church in 325 CE and 451 CE, humanized God. Now, this is part of the collective consciousness again, and why we have to be on guard about it. Does anybody remember what happened in 325 CE? Why that's important? Huh? Council of Nicaea. That's where the Orthodox Church was defined, initially defined. The Council of Nicaea. It's the Orthodox belief of who Jesus was and who God was, and who the Trinity and what the Trinity was. That's where it came into being. That was my initial quest, and what started me on these quests to know why this lasted for 2,000 years. On a side note, 381 was 325 was the first ecumenical council. There was a second one in 381. That's where the Nicene Creed that's used today in Orthodox Church, Catholic, Lutherans, Episcopalian, even most Protestant churches use that. It was modified slightly, and that's what they use today. In 451, it was reconfirmed that Jesus was fully God and fully human, and that the Trinity, they defined a word called homoousios. It was a Greek word, and it meant that there was one substance. So what that did was humanize God. It put human characteristics to the God in the sky. Now, in his book, and Augustine, you've all heard of Augustine, was one of the early church fathers. He's the one that perpetuated this notion that from lots of Greek philosophy, and there's a real deep understanding about that, but it took away the Jewish post-exile concept that God was invisible and there was only one essence of God. It took that away. It took the Jewish, the Christian church took that away. It annulled any of that, and it surrendered itself completely to humanity's oldest and most deeply embedded impulse. It made the God of heaven and earth fully human. So Reza Aslam, in his book, God, the Human History, says that a century later, this set of beliefs put Christianity on a collision course with a new monotheistic religion born at the Arabian desert to challenge this concept of a humanized God. And we know what that was Islam. So they started channeling. That's what created a lot of conflict. Just the difference in beliefs about what God is. Typical of what we do. Our human nature is what we do. So how do we merge? So that's the background and what we have to watch for. So how do we move forward? So how do we merge in consciousness? And Eric Butterworth, in his book Answer the Call, it's Spiritual Economics, he says, answer the call to come up higher. There's many paths, many teachers. And there's also many, many, many books. And I have most of them. And I think Reverend Joe has the other ones. Right, Rob? There's a time and place for intellectual knowledge, and I haven't finished with that yet. I'm not sure when that will be, although I have moments of it. I'll know I'll have moments of it when I have to stop sneaking books in now to the house so my wife doesn't see them. That part is true. The picture of this library is not my personal. It's pretty close, but that's not mine. But so there is a time and place for intellectual knowledge, and there's also a time when head knowledge is not what we need. So moving in emerging consciousness, then head knowledge, it's where we really know who we are, the ground of being. Scholar Paul Tilk said, the ground of being. That's his definition of God, is ground of being. Being of oneness, the divine. Just resting in the silence, being still, learning to simplify life. All that can be a way to emerge in consciousness. So of the many paths, unity and new thought, the teachings are so inspired, so applicable for today. I'm probably a little prejudiced to that. I just came back from Unity Village two weeks ago studying to be the licensed Unity teacher. I have one more week to complete the coursework, and then I'll have to take a test. But so I'm a little prejudiced to that, but the teachings of Unity are so applicable still today. The language is a little outdated, I will confess, at times, and that's what steers a lot of us today away from it. But even the teachings of Charles Fillmore, as far out as he is sometimes in his teaching, still so applicable. Here's a quote from him from, Jesus Christ Heals. From the teaching that the deity is a person, we have come to believe God is changeable, that he gets angry with his people and condemns them, that some are chosen or favored above others, that in his sight good and evil are verities, that they can vary, and that he defends one and deplores the other. We must relieve our minds of these ideas of a personal God ruling over us in an arbitrary-like manner. Now, that's as applicable today as it was written back in the early 20s. And there's another one that is fantastic. This is really a good insight. This is an insight to Myrtle Fillmore. We are studying spiritual science to get a broader conception of God. Rather than hold to the view that he is a personal being with parts like a man, a being subject, and the story is that when she said that, she recorded it later, it was written down later, when she said that she giggled. A being subject to change and capable of varying moods. Though personal to each one of us, God is it, I-T, capital I-T, neither male or female, but principle. God is not good, senseless principle like that of mathematics, but the principle of life, love, and intelligence. And that was from How to Let God Help You, from Myrtle Fillmore. Just, very insightful, very inspirational. Eric Butterworth, it's a new book called Practical Metaphysics. He says there is no way that you can ever become spiritual. No way. And that takes you back. Being spiritual is already your nature. You already are spiritual. You're created in God's image and likeness. And when we say that all the time because that was in Genesis, that we're created that way. That means the essence of who we are. Not form, but the essence of who we are is God. Energy, if you will. You can never be anything less. The other path is scholars today. There's just Bill Warner, Bill and I are book nuts, especially John Shelby Spong nuts. And Spong says in his latest book, Unbelievable, he talks about why neither ancient creeds nor Reformation can produce a living faith today. He says Christianity must change. Rather than hold on to the first century concepts of the universe that was written in the Gospels and these creeds that were written in the 4th and 5th centuries, it's got to change for Christianity to morph. And really, unity and new thought is in the best place in the world to do it. In God, Human History, Reza Aslan says we have evolved to define a God with human characteristics. It's been so ingrained into us. That's how we've evolved. That's why we must work diligently to remove these concepts. So here's what we know about mergings and concepts. God is principle. We are individualized expressions of the divine. So if God is principle, how do we experience God on a personal level? I mean, that seems like a paradox. It is a little bit. But each one of us are an individualized expression of this God of the universe. And we experience God uniquely. The way we experience God uniquely is how we experience God. It gets beyond principle and makes it personal. I think I mentioned this a minute ago. In Eric Butterworth's book, he says the divinity of man, Jesus' main teaching, was in Discover the Power Within You. That was missed or put aside by the Orthodox Church when they said, the Christ consciousness was just in Jesus, not in anybody else. And then we know the kingdom of heaven is a metaphor that says it's within us, it's within all of us. The mystics tell us the secret of the universe was hidden in man because he surely wouldn't look for it there. In a recent talk I heard at a Center for Spiritual Living, a religious science church, the minister said, this new thought path that we're on is not for sissies. Now, why did he say that? Well, it takes courage. We must step up. It's not about just sitting in church on Sunday. Reverend Joe tells us that every Sunday. We have to practice the fifth principle, all the principles, but particularly the fifth principle. We have to take what we learn and put it into our lives. And socially, Linda Martella-Whitsitt, who is a great Unity, she runs Silent Unity in Kansas City. In her book, Divine Audacity, she says, bold spiritual living under radical premise that I am divine, you are divine. My nature is one with the nature of God, is socially risky to define our identity that way. It's also problematic to admit it to ourselves because once we do, we don't have any excuse. We must accept responsibilities for our thoughts, words, and acts. Can't pretend to be helpless. We must draw from the one power every day, and that one power is us. It's within us. It requires audacity. That's her terms. Live the fifth principle. Prayer and meditation, denials and affirmation kind of go hand in hand. And denials and affirmations get pushed aside in most of our daily teachings in Unity. And they're very powerful. I mean, coming back from Unity Village, I've been doing a routine with it's extremely powerful. Denials and affirmations like weed pulling and planting flowers. Denials are the pulling the weeds and then planting the flowers of the affirmations. A spiritual denial is a powerful, potent practice we can use in our metaphysical practice. So we use the prayer and the denials and affirmations to improve our conscious contact. Meditation, concentration, denials and affirmation, and in the silence are all forms of what is loosely termed prayer. This is in Jesus Christ Heals from Charles Fillmore. Man must be lifted up, and there's no way to do this except through prayer. Prayer liberates the energies pent up in your mind and body. So in the morning, look yourself in the mirror and say out loud an affirmation. Whatever you need to work on, it can be a combination, a denial/affirmation. Practice them. Look into yourself in the mirror and say them. And then the last bullet on this slide says, take your beingness into your doing. So that's a term I've used a lot. What does that mean? It means practice the fifth principle. Practice what you know. Eric Butterworth says, practice of the presence of God has very little to do with those moments when you study or have meditation. Now that's weird. That's just contradictory to what I said. He said, obviously that's an important part of it, but there's so much more. The practice of the present means what you do with your life. Like the practice of medicine is what the doctor does for a living. Think about that. Do we do that? Do we do that? What do you do? Oh, I practice the present. Do you? Are you practicing the present when you worry? Are you practicing the present when you're fuming and fretting when someone cuts you off in traffic? Or worse, flip them off? Are you practicing the present when you're gossiping about your coworker or neighbor? So that's what he says, is practice the present. That's what it really is. To practice the present the presence of God is to live constantly as if you really believe that the allness of God, the divine potential for wholeness, were present within you. Be in the world, not of it. That's how we do that. So declare your truth. There's one life. There's one God. This is my life. There is no separation. There's no separation. That's one of the things that we need to let go of and always remember. God dwells in you, as you, and through you. Again, another quote from Linda Martella Whitsitt. You are the light of the world, referring to Jesus' audacious statement. Using the metaphor of the light, that's who we are. You are the light of the world. As we change our own, as you realize that, as you change your consciousness, we change the world. We emerge into higher consciousness when we experience awe and wonder of the presence of God. So one activity that's somebody suggested for this, matter of fact, I've tried it for sometimes. I don't do it very often, but it's be silent. Be in the silence. Set your phone for every hour. Set in the silence for 3 minutes. Try it for a day. 1 hour. Set your alarm and be in the silence for 3 minutes every hour of every day. It changes your life. And also turn the TV off for a long time. The wonder of the universe. There's so many wonders and experience. When's the last time you truly experienced the awe and wonder of God? The awe and wonder. And again, this is coming from you. We experience it from us, not from something outside. We do it through nature. We do it through loving children, the elderly. Everything is God stuff. Everything has the essence of God in it. Even in confusion of outer stuff, when life just seems so much outer, the way we rise, the way we emerge, is living in inner calm. Best stated in the poem by Ernest Holmes. I am submerged in peace. I am surrounded by peace. I am immersed in peace. There is nothing but peace. Peace, deep, calm, undisturbed. Peace. There's a great book that I've just started. I heard the sermon up at Unity Village on it. It's Living from the Mountaintop by Christian Sorensen. Be the mystic you were born to be. There's so much more deeper. Again, this is about our soul emerging, our consciousness emerging. And how do we do that? So there's so much more that we've got to learn in this journey. The mystical, there's been mystics in our lives, in our world for years. We all know who that Merton, Meister Eckhart, Gandhi, some say Oprah. But this is a reminder how beautiful we each are if we just accept our own divinity. Living from that divinity, if we just do that, we live a mystical experience. He defines mysticism as a soul experience. Can't be explained in words. The mystical journey will help you shift your dependence from rational need to know with explanations and guarantees up front to the security of trusting your inner states of awareness. Again, in our Western society, we're so linear thinking. We think in terms, and I'm an engineer by profession, so the linear thinking, the way my brain has been taught, is to think in linear fashion. The mystic concept appeals to me to, change some of those brain cells and rewire them so I don't think so linearly. John Shelby Spong says this so elegantly: to live life fully, love wastefully, so you can be the best you can be. And I add to that, so that you can be the best expression of the Christ potential in you. Thank you, Michael. Live life fully, love wastefully, so you can be the best you can be. So from the caterpillar to the chrysalis to the butterfly, look around you and you'll see fellow truth students or others emerging to the true selves, just like you. I think Stripe is the one coming out on the left, the one that Rosa mentioned. He's coming out of the green goo of the chrysalis. And after the service last week, Sally and Rob were discussing this metamorphosis of the caterpillar into a butterfly. And she mentioned this process that isn't without struggle. And I found a Daily Word a few weeks ago that said the same thing. The butterfly, when it comes out, has to pump blood to its wings to get the wings working. It takes a lot of energy. So it's a struggle. It seems like it's natural. I thought it would be just a natural thing. It's not. The wings must dry and the butterfly must exercise his muscles before it can fly. So there's a process to it, just like for us. So realization and awareness of the divine present touches our hearts, our mind, our soul so profoundly in its magnificence, its grandeur, its newness. We begin to fly and soar. Let go, fly on the realization of your oneness with the divine. So again, Reza Aslam in his book, God, Human History, has this this is the very last paragraph in the book. So this is a very, I'm spoiling it for you at the end. There's a lot of history behind this. You've got to read what leads up to it about his depth, what God is and all that. But it's very profound. I like profound things that challenge. This is a place where you can have your questions answered and your answers questioned. This is one of them. So then, make your choice. Believe in God or not. Define God how you will. Either way, take a lesson from our mythological ancestors, Adam and Eve, and eat the forbidden fruit. You need not fear God. Wait for it. You are God. Namaste.